Good morning. My name is Anjana Harshitha, Assistant Professor, St. Peter's Engineering College, Department of ECE. Today, I am talking about the subject Mobile Communications and Network. First of all, dwelling into the subject, what is the subject? The subject is Mobile Communications and Networks. Why should we have a separate name as Mobile Communications? Why not it's communication simply? Because here we know the term communication has come from the terminology telling transfer of information. Okay, so we know communication is transfer of information, and why it should be named as mobile communication in particular. Here, the trick is, or the word added to it means our mobile is the technology we are using. Here, our mobile is the technology we are using for transmission of the information. So that's why it is called as mobile communication. Then it could stop at mobile communication. Why did we move forward to again networks? Because if we simply have a mobile for the communication, will the network form automatically? It's not possible. So this designing of networks, developing those networks and forming it is also done in the subject. So we can totally define our subject telling we are using mobile for the communication purpose, that is for the transfer of the information. We are using mobile phones as the technology, and different networks must be developed between the mobile phones and the base stations for the communication to happen. That is a whole overview of your subject dealing with your mobiles as the means for the communication. Okay, why we should know? So in order to go into a subject, first you should know what is the subject means, why do we need it, and how it is related to our real-time applications. So what it is, I already gave you an overview. And why do we need mobile communications? Why do we generally not require any other form? So if you look into your previous experiences or into your histories, we can see communication was neither through any technology nor through the devices. It was only through paper, birds, or some sounds, some type of noises was the first form of information transmission, which was very much unpredictable. It might transfer, it might be reaching the enemy site, anything might happen. Then from there, the concept, a new device or the technology is required for the communication to happen in from person to person has come up. So there we came with the invention of your mobile communications. Okay, and how you do go for it, we will be completely learning step by step in the coming units. Okay, now coming to your first heading, that is nothing but limitations of the communication network. Coming to the first topic of the subject, limitations of the conventional networks, and coming to the first unit, that is introduction to the mobile radio environment. Okay, so why it is mobile radio environment again? Why not here? Why did we go for the term mobile radio environment? Okay, so before going to the limitations, first we shall talk about the topic mobile radio environment. Why in particular the unit name itself they mentioned introduction to mobile radio environment. Here the term we can simply tell it's a radio mobile environment because we are using mobiles as our communication devices. But why did we mention mobile radio environment? Here the point why radio was included is the transmission media used for the communication there is the radio waves. Okay, we know we are using radio. Sorry, we know we are using mobile phones, which are wireless devices for the communication, and we know the transmission is happening without any wires in between. But we don't know what was the means for the communication for the signal to transmit from our mobile phone to the other person who is talking on the other side. What was the medium there? Here, the radio waves are the medium. That's why it is named as mobile radio environment. So we will first deal with mobile radio environments because that is the radio medium we are using for transmission. Then we will slowly dwell into the other problems like fading, other sort of conditions like propagation path loss in the entire unit. So coming to your first topic in your unit is limitations of the conventional networks. Here again, why did I use a new term called conventional network? Here conventional is nothing but wired phones. We can directly go into wireless, but why we have to again talk about the topic limitations of conventional networks? Because when we are going for the invention of something, we find a certain disadvantage at one point, and in order to overcome at those disadvantages only, we go for our new invention. Similarly, we have found certain limitations with our wired phones. That's why we have jumped to the wireless networks. So first we should know what are the major problems we find with. When we know problem, we find a solution for that, and that solution was your wireless communication. So in order to go for wireless, you should know the problem with your wired devices, right? So first comes your limiter service capability. Then comes your poor performance. And third comes your inefficient frequency spectrum utilization. Okay, we will deal with one by one each in particular. What are these limitations? Because if we know what are the certain limitations in depth, only we can develop a well processed wireless network, right? So first comes your limited service capability. That is taken short, limited service capability. And what does it mean? Okay, now as you can look at the diagram, we know wired phones are connected, we know wires are available. Now let me tell, my device is traveling from this zone to the next zone. Then what happens to my signal at this point? Here the problem is the signal cuts off. That's why when you travel from one area to another area, when you travel from one area to another area, there is high chances of you losing the signal and you have to reinitiate a call. That is a major problem when you are dealing with your wireless phones. Okay, wireless phones also the problem. But what happens to wired? In wired, there is no chance of you carrying the phones at all, right? That is the problem of mobility. So the problem was mobility with your wired phones, right? So in order to solve that problem, we came for wireless. One of the solution is using a frequency at nearest possible zones. That's the concept called frequency reuse. Okay, that is we allocate certain number of channels for certain zones and provide that channels to the users available in that particular zone. This type of using the technology cannot be permitted when you use wired phones, because your transmission there was only through wire, and if there is some sort of cut, there is some sort of forest in between, there are some water bodies in between, your wired connection development becomes a very biggest problem when it is coming to your wired phones. So that's why we say our first limitation is a limited service capability. We can provide only limited services because the wire cannot travel longer distances. So that is a major problem when it comes to your conventional telephones, that is limited service capability. Then comes your next limitation, poor performance. Okay, the next limitation is your poor performance. What do we mean by poor performance? When you know, when you take your wired phones and there is a heavy rainfall that day, or there are heavy winds, then what happens to your wires there? There might be chances of breakdown of the networks. There might be collapsing of the towers. There might be breakdown. Even by a small instigation from a bird, your network can be highly affected, losing the communication for the day or for particular days, number of days, right? So poor performance is the next major limitation we find in your wired communication, that is your conventional networks. So when you come to the channels available, we have only 33 channels when the newly invented mobile phones were there, and the availability of the number of persons using the channels have been high. So here what did they do? These 33 channels were again divided based on your frequencies, that is 40 megahertz, 150 megahertz, and 450 megahertz. That MTS is nothing but mobile telephone system, and 40 megahertz was the frequency allocated for your mobile telephone system. That is one type of channels, or one frequency was completely given to mobile telephone systems, and that 150 megahertz is the frequency allocated for MJ systems, and 450 megahertz is the frequency allocated for MK systems. That is, all the subscribers or the users under MJ system can be provided only with 150 megahertz, and those with MK system will be provided with 450 megahertz. As we can see, there are variations in the frequencies provided also. The fastest or the speed at which your transmission of the signal or the transmission of the call data, everything changes because of the different uses of the frequencies. This is another limitation where we find with your wireless phones also. Then coming to your next, inefficient frequency spectrum utilization. Third limitation is inefficient frequency spectrum utilization. Here, what do we mean by inefficient frequency spectrum utilization is the capability of a channel to accommodate the number of users at the BZR. Here, BZR, here I used two terms: BZR, number of customers, and number of channels. Okay, so I am telling we can relate as inefficient frequency spectrum utilization as the number of customers a channel can accommodate at the BZR. It means the BZR is nothing but, suppose, let me tell, at the time of 9 o'clock where all the officers has to start, where the colleges should start, and where multiple people will be at the verge of booking cabs or vehicles or truck, calling their colleagues to wait for them, or calling the bus people to know their location. So that was the busiest hour where multiple people want to use the channels available, but the channels are very limited. As we know already, the count only 33. How a 33 channel count can accommodate these one number of multiple users? So here the problem is inefficient frequency spectrum utilization. Although we have multiple frequencies available, but we are using only 3 frequencies for accommodating these many large number of people also. This becomes the biggest problem when you are dealing with the frequencies in wireless phones and wired problems with the wires in the wired phones. Okay, so if you considered offered load, or if you calculate it with a formula, how we know the inefficient frequency spectrum utilization, offered load can be calculated as the average calling time into number of customers into number of channels by 60 minutes. Here you can say I took only 60 minutes. It can be 120 minutes. It can be any other minute. I can take just 1 minute. But why did I particularly mention 60 minutes? Because it is related to the logic. We are talking about the busy hour, and 1 hour is nothing but 60 minutes, right? So we are talking about the hour, and we are dealing about the busy hour situation. So we have to know the knowledge of the number of customers available, or the requirement of the customers at that time, number of channels availability at that time, and the average calling time. Sometimes one person just picks up a call, I'm on the location, and he cuts off the call. That means the call duration was very limited. And whereas the other person keeps on talking on a call to continue the journey by talking to the other person. So there the call time is too much, right? So here we have to take the average calling time also into consideration while calculating the offered load for that particular cell site. Okay, so these are the three limitations. So if you look into three limitations, one is limited service availability, next is poor performance, and the last is your inefficient frequency spectrum utilization. So when we look into all these problems, we can see at no area we are accommodating our users with good communication system, although we went for the inventions of the mobile communication system, right? So what did we later change to get a good communication system? So first we shall talk about the generations. So next we shall talk about the generations of mobile phone. I hope most of you have heard about this 1G, 5G, 2G, and now we are running towards 5G. And what does this G tell about? Nothing but generations. And how did we come so far to 5G when we already have all other Gs, that is 1G, 2G, 3G? Already we have previous generations, but why we have to run behind or run to the advancement is, in the first generation, it was just analog communication. That is, only your voice signals will be transmitted from the transmitted side to the receiver side, or recepted from the receiver side to the transmitted side. Only analog form of communication, that is voice signals, will be transmitted, right? So we could have stopped there, but why did we move to the next? Because if we come to the analog communication, and when we look into the point where mobile communications was first invented, we can find many disturbances, many call disturbances, voice disturbances, inaudibilities. All these were the certain more number of limitations we observed when we come to mobile phones. So what did they do? They invented the new term, or they moved to the next, that is digital. And what do you mean by digital here? Digital is nothing but the signals are transmitted in the form of zeros and ones. That is, your analog voice signals will be converted in the form of zeros and ones, which is high security than your analog communication. So we move to second generation where it uses only digital communication. That means your voices will be transmitted in the form of zeros and ones. That's it. And there we do not have any kind of transmissions like messages, videos, voice signals, nothing. But we are now running with all those being transmitted from one end, even across the oceans, and how it is done. So then we went for your third generation, where along with the digital, we added the ability to transmit messages. Any written form of message you can transmit when it comes to your third generation. And we know we are at fourth generation, and we are running towards 5. Implementation of 5, somewhere it's already implemented, but it's not highly embedded into our living environments. But most of the people we can know, they are working, they are using a 4G technology, where along with the digital, we have message transmission, we have all type of data being transmitted, like video, audio, photos, files, any form of files. All this we are able to do. How? That was the invention, and where we went for 4G technology. Then why do we need 5G again? Here we need a 5G technology because that speed is not sufficient, because our humans will not stop at any point with the sufficiency. We lack about sufficiency, and we need too much high speed of data for transmission. Here it's taking 1 minute, and I want it to be done within 2 seconds. So there you go for 5G transmission. So it is 5G technology, where we go for high speed data packets transmission. Okay, that comes your uh, generations of the mobile phones. Then comes your basic cellular system. So in your basic cellular system, we can find the major basic components, and this can be taken as the working prototype of how your actually call or any transmission is done. Here, this is your mobile phone, this is your cell site, and this is your MTSO. MTSO is nothing but mobile telephone switching office. So this is the basic setup which is required for your mobile communication to happen. You have a mobile phone, you have a cell site, that is cell towers, and you have a MTSO, and we have PSTN, that is public switched telephone network. And why it is required in particular? Now let me tell you, want to take a call, you want to make a call, which is the major important required thing there? Your mobile phone. And if you are putting up a call, will the mobile phone directly connect to the other person on the mobile phone? No, it should connect to a cell site, that is your cell tower. So whenever you make a call, the call reaches the cell site to know the user is connected to its own cell site or any other cell site. Okay, so suppose you are an Airtel member and you are making a call to a person who is Zio. How the call is being connected? We are not from the same network, we don't come under one network. How it is being connected? Here what happens is your MTSO plays a major role, that is mobile telephone switching office. All your billing purposes, all your conversions from one network to the another network, everything is done by MTSO. So whenever you make a call, it goes to the cell site, and cell site transmit the same call to MTSO, and MTSO will make a note of which subscriber it belongs to and transmit it to that particular cell site, which again reaches to the receiver mobile phone. So that is how your mobile communication is actually happening. Why this PSTN is nothing but wired network. Suppose you are calling to a wired phone, it should be connected, and how that connection is also developed with the help from MTSO. Your MTSO will develop that connection to your wired phone also. Okay, so this is the major cellular system, how your communication through mobile phone is happening. And if you come to the links in between, you have multiple links. Okay, so these are your radio links, that is from mobile phone to the cell site, that is radio waves are transmitted, and from here to here we have data links. So any sort of information from the cell site will be transmitted to MTSO through the data links, and from MTSO to PSTN through voice trunks. So if we have a very high speed data, that is they are using 5G technology, there we use microwave links. Okay, so this is how your basic cellular system happens, and completely how you want to think about how a mobile communication happens. This is the network used. So when if you go for a small recap, we have come across what is actually the mobile communication and networks, what the subject is actually about, and how the transfer of information is happening, because we are using radio waves for the transmission without wires. And then what are the major limitations of wired phones which led us to the invention of the wireless phones. So we have three limitations, that is limited service, poor performance, next inefficient frequency utilization. Although we have frequencies available, but we are using very limited, which will not help us to cover all larger areas. And third, we next went for the generations, how we are at new generations now. Basically developed from 1G, from analog we came to digital, from digital new advances were added going on with the digital, and then now we have come across basic cellular system, where the major or the peak or the unique point where our invention or the communication starts is your basic cellular system. Thank you.